At 2:17 on a Saturday afternoon, Blythe Wexler ordered security to clear 40 Texas Longhorns off my ranch road so her wedding limousines could get through. The funny part was, the Longhorns were exactly where they were supposed to be, moving from our north pasture toward the south, holding pins on a route my family had used for decades. The limousines, shuttle buses, florist vans, and catering trucks were the ones that did not belong there. That was the problem. I was sitting on horseback near the cedar gate when Blythe came striding toward me in an ivory blazer and tin boots, her phone in one hand, and a Crown Mesa security guard beside her. Behind me, 40 Longhorns moved through the Texas dust at a slow, controlled pace, while ahead of me nearly 180 event guests were trapped in a line of vehicles on a gravel road never built for luxury traffic. Blythe pointed toward the herd and said, "Move your cattle. This road is reserved for Crown Mesa guests until 4. I checked my watch. 2:17. She had been warned. Days earlier, I had sent Crown Mesa written notice that Red Spur Road would be in active cattle use from 2 o'clock until 4 o'clock that afternoon. Blythe knew the schedule, knew the cattle were coming, and still told security to keep the road open for her wedding showcase. I looked at her and said, "Your guests are standing on an active cattle route." She did not like that answer. Copper Jack, the old red and white steer leading the herd, slowed near Blythe's Range Rover and stood there calmly chewing while the other Longhorns settled behind him. Nobody was running, nobody was in danger, and my ranch hands were telling guests to stay beside their vehicles and give the cattle room. But Blythe was already on the phone calling the sheriff. She told dispatch I was deliberately using livestock to interfere with HOA business and demanded that someone come stop me. I let her talk. That was important. When the deputy arrived, he took one look at the cattle, the stopped event vehicles, and the black and gold sign attached to my cedar gate that read, "Crown Mesa Private Event Access." Then he told everyone to keep the vehicles still until the herd could move through safely. Blythe immediately started explaining that Crown Mesa had historic access rights across my ranch, and that I was trying to block a route the community had used for years. I did not argue with her. I handed the deputy a copy of my cattle movement notice and asked him to document the gate, the replacement lock, the event vehicles, and Blythe's complaint exactly as she made it. She stared at me like I was helping her. I was not. The deputy made it clear that he could handle safety and write a report, but he was not going to decide a property or easement dispute on the side of a gravel road. That was fine with me, because I did not need him to decide anything that afternoon. I only needed a clean record of what Crown Mesa was claiming. That was enough. Blythe thought the sheriff's report would make me look like the unreasonable rancher who had blocked a luxury event with cattle. What she did not understand was that she had just put her claim to Red Spur Road into an official record while standing beside a sign her HOA had placed on my gate. And standing there with 40 Longhorns on the road and Blythe insisting the HOA had the right to be there, I kept thinking about one thing. If someone started charging strangers to use a road your family had maintained for generations, would you confront them right then, or would you stay quiet long enough to make them prove their claim on paper? I already knew what I was going to do. The herd started moving again. Copper Jack stepped past the Range Rover, and the wedding traffic stayed exactly where it was until the cattle cleared the lane. Blythe kept talking about old development maps and historic access like those words settled everything. They did not. Because I knew the map she was talking about, and I knew there was one word printed beside that dotted line she never seemed interested in reading out loud. Proposed. That single word was going to matter a lot more than she realized. Let me back up. My name is Nolan Greer Calder, and I was 54 years old when Blythe Wexler decided a road my family had used for generations belonged in her event brochure. Calder Spur Ranch covers 780 acres in the Texas Hill Country, where dry yellow grass rolls between old live oaks, limestone ridges, and stock tanks that look silver in the early morning sun. Red Spur Road runs almost 1.4 miles through the ranch, from the north pasture down toward the south holding pins, and to most people it looks like nothing more than a well-kept gravel road behind a cedar gate. To me, it was family history. My grandfather, Amos Calder, opened that route in 1968 because he needed a safe way to move cattle between pastures without cutting across rough limestone ground. My father maintained it after him, grading the gravel, clearing fallen limbs, repairing drainage after heavy rain, and teaching me why a ranch road has to serve the land instead of somebody's idea of what looks pretty. By the time I was 12, I knew every bend. Red Spur was never fancy. I spent most of my working life as a livestock transportation coordinator, which meant I planned how cattle moved between ranches, holding facilities, sale barns, and processing points without creating needless risk for animals, drivers, or the public. That work teaches you patience because a 1,000-pound animal does not care about your schedule, and it teaches you to notice small details because a bad gate, a blocked lane, or one vehicle in the wrong place can turn an easy job into a mess. I brought those habits home with me. Details matter. Years earlier, my wife Rebecca and I had planned to run Calder Spur together once I stepped away from transportation work, but she died in an accident before we ever got that chance. For a while I kept working because staying busy was easier than coming home to a quiet house, but eventually I realized I was spending my life moving everybody else's livestock, while the place my family had built was waiting for me. So I came home for good. The ranch gave me a routine again. Most mornings started before sunrise with coffee on the porch, then fence checks, water levels, feed records, cattle counts, and whatever repair had moved to the top of the list overnight. I did not dress like some television cowboy either. Calder Spur was a serious operation, and I treated meetings the same way I treated the ranch, usually in a clean Western shirt, dark jeans, good leather boots, and a felt hat that had seen weather but was taken care of. I owned the place, and I respected it. Red Spur was part of that operation, not a scenic driveway waiting for somebody to discover it. We used it for scheduled cattle movements because the grade was gentle, the turns were wide enough for the herd, and it connected directly to the south pens and stock tanks without forcing the animals onto a public road. Our ranch logs showed those movements year after year. That would matter later. There was something else my grandfather had told me about Red Spur, something I had not thought about in a long time until Blythe walked onto my property carrying that old map. Crown Mesa's developer had approached Amos years earlier about crossing the ranch, and whenever I asked what happened, Grandpa gave me the same simple answer. They asked. I said no. At the time, that was enough for me because Amos was the kind of man who kept tax receipts older than I was and labeled fence repair invoices by pasture. After Blythe showed me a map claiming something different, I started wondering what Grandpa had kept. That question stayed with me. Crown Mesa Estates sat along our eastern boundary, a polished subdivision of stone entrances, trimmed landscaping, and large homes positioned to catch the hill country sunsets. I had no problem with the people who lived there, and for years we got along just fine because their neighborhood stayed on their side of the fence and my cattle stayed on mine. Then the clubhouse started changing. At first I noticed more delivery trucks, then weekend tents, then signs directing guests toward weddings and corporate dinners, and soon I was hearing music across the pasture on Saturday nights. None of that bothered me. What bothered me was the morning Blythe Arden Wexler arrived at my gate with a leather portfolio under one arm and the confidence of someone who thought the important part of a property discussion had already happened without the property owner. She smiled, introduced herself as the new Crown Mesa Homeowners Association president, and told me she wanted to discuss a mutual benefit opportunity. Then she opened her portfolio. Inside was the map. The map looked official enough to fool anyone who only glanced at it, with parcel lines, road names, survey marks, and a dotted line running from Crown Mesa straight across Red Spur Road. Blythe placed one manicured finger on that line and told me it was the subdivision's emergency access, then started talking about how opening it for selected events would improve the guest experience and create a premium western entrance to the clubhouse. She spoke like we were discussing where to place a flower bed instead of whether strangers could drive across my ranch. Then I read the label. Proposed emergency access, I said, tapping the paper with my finger, and Blythe gave me a patient smile like I was the one having trouble understanding plain English. She said the map came from the original Crown Mesa development file. Their legal team had reviewed the property history, and the Homeowners Association was simply putting an existing access right to better use. I looked at her and asked, "What is the recording number?" Her smile paused. Just for a second. Blythe closed the portfolio halfway and asked what I meant, so I told her that if somebody had granted Crown Mesa an easement across Calder Spur Ranch, there should be paperwork showing exactly what was granted and where it was recorded. I was not trying to sound like a lawyer because I was not one, but years of transportation work had taught me not to confuse a plan with permission. Paper beats assumptions. The developer paperwork is more than 20 years old, Blythe said. and our attorney is comfortable with our position." Then she shifted into the kind of language people use when they want a simple claim to sound too complicated to challenge, talking about historic use, community liability, emergency planning, and the mutual economic benefit of connecting the ranch approach to Crown Mesa's event venue. I let her finish without interrupting. That bothered her. I told Blythe I had never granted Crown Mesa commercial access. My family had never treated Red Spur as a public road, and until she produced a signed and recorded right saying otherwise, catering trucks and wedding guests were not using it. She stared at me for a moment, then said, "Mr. Calder, I really hope we can avoid making this difficult." I nodded. "So do I." That was our first real disagreement. She left in a dark luxury sport utility vehicle, rolling slowly down the county road while I stood by the cedar gate with the image of that dotted line still stuck in my head. What bothered me was not that Crown Mesa had an old proposal, because developers propose things all the time. What bothered me was how certain Blythe sounded that a proposal had somehow become a right. Grandpa Amos had said they asked, and he said no. Somebody was wrong. Over the next week, I started noticing little things that made Blythe's visit feel less like a conversation and more like the first step of a plan already in motion. A photographer stopped near our eastern fence around sunset and took pictures toward Red Spur, and 2 days later Crown Mesa's event page showed a polished image of a gravel road under live oaks with language teasing a new, private Western arrival experience. They never used my name. They did not need to. Anyone who knew the area could see exactly which road they were selling. I saved screenshots with the dates and put them in a folder on my computer, then printed copies because my father had raised me to trust paper when something mattered. I also pulled our recent ranch logs and checked cattle movements on Red Spur, including dates, herd counts, and maintenance notes. I was not preparing for a fight. I was preparing for facts. 3 mornings later, I drove toward the east pasture to check a stock tank and noticed something shining on the cedar gate before I even got out of my truck. The brass lock I had used for years was gone, and a new heavy lock had been fitted through the chain. Beside it hung a clean black and gold sign that had definitely not been there the night before. Crown Mesa Private Event Access. I stood there reading it twice, because sometimes the most unbelievable part of a property dispute is how comfortable somebody becomes once they decide your permission is optional. Then I heard tires on gravel behind the gate. A white florist van came around the bend carrying buckets of flowers. The driver gave me a friendly wave, and before I could even decide what to say, a catering truck appeared behind it. Neither driver looked like a trespasser. They looked like people following directions somebody had been paid to give them. That mattered. I took out my phone, photographed the new lock, the sign, both vehicles, and the time, then stepped away from the road instead of turning somebody else's bad decision into an argument with 2 workers who knew nothing about it. Blythe wanted access. I wanted a record. I did not touch the new lock that morning, because the fastest way to ruin a clean property dispute is to let anger create a second dispute nobody needed. Instead, I photographed the gate from both sides, wrote down the vehicle descriptions, saved the time, and drove back to the ranch office to prepare a certified notice stating that Crown Mesa had no permission for me to use Red Spur for commercial traffic. I mailed 1 copy to the Homeowners Association and another to the attorney listed on their public correspondence. I kept the receipts. For days later, a letter arrived from Crown Mesa's lawyers saying the association believed it possessed historic access rights across the ranch and warning me not to interfere with lawful community operations while the matter was being reviewed. The letter never gave me the one thing I had asked Blythe for, a signed easement or a recording number. It gave me 3 pages of confidence instead. That was interesting. By the next Saturday, wedding shuttles were coming through the east gate again, followed by a catering van and a black limousine that raised a trail of pale dust all the way toward the clubhouse. I called the sheriff's office, explained that commercial vehicles were crossing private ranch property after written notice, and asked for someone to document what was happening. The deputy who arrived was calm and careful, which was exactly what the situation needed. He did not pretend to be a judge. "Mr. Calder," he said, "I can document the complaint and deal with any immediate safety problem, but I cannot decide an easement dispute out here beside the road." I told him I understood, showed him my notice, and asked him to include the new lock and Crown Mesa sign in his report. Blythe arrived before he finished. Of course she did. She stepped out in tailored slacks and an ivory blouse, carrying that leather portfolio again, and immediately told the deputy that Crown Mesa had used the route historically and that I was suddenly trying to block legitimate access to community property. I asked her again for the recording number. She changed the subject. The deputy eventually told both of us that ownership and easement questions would need to be settled through records and the proper legal process. Then he left after documenting the scene. Blythe smiled like she had won something. She had not. By Monday, Crown Mesa residents were being told that law enforcement had declined to interfere with the association's access, which sounded very different from what the deputy had actually said. The event traffic increased, and Red Spur started showing the difference between ranch use and commercial use faster than Blythe expected. Shuttle buses pushed gravel toward the shoulders, delivery trucks left shallow ruts after rain, and drivers unfamiliar with cattle country sometimes stopped in places we needed clear for ranch operations. I documented that too. Every time. Then I found the price. A Crown Mesa event package advertised an add-on called Exclusive Private Ranch Arrival, promising guests a 1.4-mile western approach beneath live oaks before reaching the clubhouse, and the charge was $950 per event. I sat at my desk and read the page twice, because there is a big difference between somebody claiming they may cross your property and somebody charging strangers for the privilege. Blythe was not treating Red Spur like emergency access anymore. She was selling an experience. That changed things. I sent another written notice explaining that Red Spur remained an active agricultural route used for livestock movement and that commercial traffic was interfering with ranch operations. Then I attached the dates of several upcoming cattle movements so nobody could later say they had not been warned. One of those dates was a Saturday afternoon, when we needed to move 40 Longhorns from the north pasture to the south, holding pins for scheduled health checks. The time window was simple, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Crown Mesa received it. 2 days later, I learned their luxury wedding showcase was scheduled for the same Saturday, with close to 180 guests expected at the clubhouse. I called the association office and reminded the manager that cattle would be moving on Red Spur during that window, and she sounded uncomfortable when she told me the event schedule had already been approved by Blythe. Then use your public entrance, I said. That should have ended it. Instead, Friday evening, one of my ranch hands drove past the east side and saw Crown Mesa Security placing directional signs toward Red Spur for the next day's event. I went down there myself just before sunset and photographed every sign without touching a single one. Then I checked our cattle schedule once more. We had given notice. Our route had not changed, and the herd needed to reach the south pins whether Crown Mesa had booked a wedding showcase or not. Saturday came bright and dry, with barely a cloud over the hill country. At 2 o'clock, we opened the north pasture gate. At 2:17, Copperjack came around the limestone ridge. The first thing I did when Copperjack came around that ridge was slow everything down, because cattle do not care about wedding schedules, and they certainly do not understand why somebody parked a limousine in their regular path. My ranch hands spread out along the herd, kept the Longhorns together, and told the nearest guests to stay beside their vehicles until we passed. Nobody needed a dramatic afternoon. Blythe created one anyway. She came toward me from her Range Rover with her phone in one hand and a Crown Mesa security man beside her, telling me I had been warned that the road was reserved for event traffic until 4 o'clock. I reminded her that my cattle notice covered the exact same period and had been delivered before her security signs went up. Then I pointed toward the public entrance. You have another road. She hated that answer. Copperjack stopped a short distance from her vehicle while the rest of the herd slowed behind him, and suddenly every polished event vehicle on Red Spur had nowhere useful to go. Guests started lifting their phones, but my attention stayed on the cattle because one careless person walking too close could make an ordinary livestock movement harder than it needed to be. I asked everyone to stay still and give us room. Safety came first. Blythe did not see it that way, because she was already telling somebody on the phone that I was intentionally blocking Crown Mesa's business with livestock. When she said the words, using cattle as a weapon, even her security man glanced at her like he knew that was going too far. I did not take the bait. I wanted her exact words recorded. By the time the deputy arrived, Copperjack had started moving again, and we were guiding the herd past the stopped vehicles one careful group at a time. The deputy looked at the Longhorns, looked at the wedding shuttles, then looked at the black and gold Crown Mesa sign hanging from my cedar gate. All right, he said. Nobody moves a vehicle until these cattle are clear. Simple. Blythe immediately began explaining historic access rights, commercial losses, deliberate interference, and how I had created a dangerous situation to embarrass the homeowners association. I waited until she finished, then handed the deputy a copy of my cattle movement notice showing the date, the 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock window, and proof that Crown Mesa had received it. I also showed him photographs of the replacement lock and the event sign. Facts travel lighter than speeches. I want her complaint documented exactly as she made it. I told him, and Blythe gave me a strange look because she expected me to defend myself instead of asking for more paperwork. The deputy confirmed that he could document what he saw, but was not going to decide ownership or easement rights there on the road. That was fine with me. I was finally asking the right question. The next morning, I called Evelyn May Caraway, a property attorney whose office was about 40 minutes away, and brought her everything I had saved. My deed, certified notices, delivery receipts, photographs, ranch logs, the Crown Mesa advertisement, and the deputy's report information. Evelyn was in her early 60s, direct without being rude, and she had the useful habit of reading a document all the way through before saying anything about it. She spent nearly 20 minutes on Blythe's old developer map. Then she looked up. "Do not tell me what she says she owns," Evelyn said. "Show me what was recorded." That was when this stopped being an argument. Evelyn contacted the county records office while I pulled older Calder files from storage, and she also brought in Grant Hollisfenner, a county road engineer familiar with subdivision approval records and old access plans. Grant started tracing Crown Mesa backward through its original development paperwork, not through brochures or board statements, but through documents with dates, signatures, approvals, and recording information. 2 days later, he found the 2004 file. Blythe had not invented the dotted line. That surprised me. Crown Mesa's original developer really had proposed a 30-foot emergency access easement across part of Calder Spur Ranch, and the file included a survey proposal, an offer letter, county comments, and a draft easement that looked official enough to impress anyone who stopped reading too early. Evelyn did not stop. There was no executed easement, no grantor signature, and no recording number showing that my family had ever transferred that right. Then Grant found another document. It was a letter from Amos Calder. My grandfather had written back to the developer explaining that Red Spur was an active cattle movement route, and that opening it to outside traffic would interfere with ranch operations, so he was rejecting the proposed easement. Grandpa had been telling me the truth in 6 words all those years. They asked. He said no. But Grant kept digging, and what he found next made Blythe's emergency access argument even weaker. Crown Mesa had later received county approval for a different emergency route on the north side of the subdivision. They already had the access they needed. Red Spur was simply prettier. Evelyn leaned back in her chair and tapped the event advertisement, charging $950 for the so-called private ranch arrival. "The road question is getting clearer," she said. "Now I want to know who decided they could sell it." Evelyn did not start with accusations, because good property work is usually less dramatic than people expect and a lot more careful. She sent a preservation letter to Crown Mesa telling the association to keep its event contracts, board emails, security invoices, vendor records, access fee records, and anything else connected to Red Spur. Then she told me not to contact Blythe unless there was an immediate ranch or safety issue. We followed the paper. Grant spent the next several days rebuilding the history of Crown Mesa's access plans from the county files, and every document made the old dotted line easier to understand. The developer had wanted a 30-foot emergency route across our ranch in 2004, but wanting one was not the same as getting one, and Amos Calder's written refusal ended that proposal before any easement was signed. The county later approved Crown Mesa using a northern emergency route instead. Case closed on that excuse. I sat at Evelyn's conference table with Grandpa's letter beside my coffee and felt something I had not expected, because seeing his signature after all those years made the dispute feel less like a fight with Blythe and more like finishing a job Amos had already started. He had not shouted at the developer or threatened anybody. He had simply stated how Red Spur was used, explained why public traffic would create a problem, and put his answer in writing. More than 20 years later, that plain letter was still doing its job. Paper lasts. Grant also compared the old county plans with current ranch maps, and the route had not magically changed just because Crown Mesa had built expensive homes beside it. Red Spur still connected our north pasture to the south, holding pens and stock tanks. Our ranch logs still showed cattle movements along it, and our maintenance records showed that Calder Spur had paid to grade and repair it. Nobody from Crown Mesa had been maintaining the road as an association asset. They had simply started using it. Evelyn explained something in a way I could actually understand. When somebody points at an old map, the important question is not whether the line exists on paper, but what legal document gave that line force. A proposal can show what somebody wanted, a draft can show what they discussed, and a survey can show where something might go, but those things are not automatically proof that an owner granted a permanent property right. You follow the record. That was the lesson Blythe kept trying to skip. A week later, Evelyn called me back to her office because Crown Mesa had begun producing records connected to the dispute, and the first batch changed the whole shape of the case. There were event booking sheets, promotional materials, vendor instructions, and internal planning documents that referred to Red Spur as a premium arrival feature rather than an emergency route. One spreadsheet projected how much additional event revenue the clubhouse could earn by offering that entrance. The number was close to $180,000 a year. This was business. Then we found the $950 charge repeated across booking documents, sometimes described as a private ranch approach, and sometimes as an exclusive Western arrival package. Couples and companies had paid Crown Mesa believing the association could sell them access, and most of those customers had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. That bothered me more than the traffic itself. Blythe had turned somebody else's property into a product. Evelyn kept reading. Buried in a group of board emails was a short message from Crown Mesa's treasurer asking a question so simple I almost laughed when I saw it. Do we own this road? Blythe's reply said the old plat provided access and told him not to complicate this while the event program was gaining momentum. There was no recording number in her answer. Again, another email discussed making the route a regular part of event operations so that closing it later would look unreasonable to residents and vendors who had grown used to using it. Evelyn read that one twice before sliding the page toward me. This is why we preserve records, she said. People explain themselves when they think nobody outside the room will ever read it. I understood exactly what she meant. Then Grant found a security invoice from the week the lock on my cedar gate disappeared. The invoice listed labor, hardware, and access control work at the East Ranch entrance, and the authorization line carried Blythe Arden Wexler's name. That connected the map, the lock, the commercial traffic, and the event fees in one clean timeline. No guessing required. I wanted to take everything straight to Crown Mesa's board, but Evelyn told me to wait because Blythe was already preparing a special homeowners meeting about what she called my access obstruction. If Blythe wanted to stand in front of her own residence and explain exactly why she believed Crown Mesa controlled Red Spur, Evelyn saw no reason to stop her. 3 days later, the meeting notice arrived. I read the agenda once, put it beside Grandpa Amos's letter, and called Evelyn. Looks like she wants an audience, I said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. Bring your binder. The special meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the Crown Mesa Clubhouse, and by 6:45 the parking lot was already fuller than I had ever seen it. Evelyn arrived carrying a slim case of certified copies. Grant brought the county development records, and I carried one plain binder with my deed, ranch logs, notices, photographs, and Grandpa Amos's letter inside. We did not need a show. Blythe apparently disagreed, because the clubhouse had rows of chairs facing a large screen, printed handouts on every seat, and a polished presentation titled Calder Ranch Access Obstruction. She was ready. Blythe stood near the front in her ivory blazer greeting residents by name, calm and polished, while 2 board members spoke quietly beside her, and the treasurer sat alone with a folder closed in front of him. I recognized several residents from around town, including people who had waved at me from the county road for years, and most of them looked less angry than confused. That was important to remember. They had been told a different story. At 7 sharp, Blythe called the meeting to order and began with a short speech about protecting community assets, preserving safe access, and preventing one neighboring landowner from disrupting services Crown Mesa had relied upon for years. Then she put a photograph of the 40 Longhorns on the screen, taken during the wedding showcase. with my cattle filling Red Spur while event vehicles waited behind them. A few people shifted in their chairs. Blythe called it deliberate obstruction. I said nothing. She explained that Crown Mesa possessed historic access across Calder Spur Ranch, that the route appeared in the original development documents, and that my recent objections had created safety problems and financial losses for the association. Then she showed the map. There it was again. The same dotted line ran across Red Spur, and from the back half of the room it looked convincing because everything around it had survey numbers, boundary marks, and official-looking notes. Blythe pointed to the line and said, "This access was part of Crown Mesa's original development planning." Evelyn leaned toward me. Let her finish. So I did. Blythe talked about the deputy's response, the event delays, and the need for the board to defend Crown Mesa's rights. But she never once said that anyone in my family had signed an easement. When she finally asked whether I wanted to respond, Evelyn stood first. "Could you enlarge the label beside the dotted line?" Blythe hesitated, then tapped the controls. The map grew larger. 2 words became easy to read. Proposed emergency access. The room got quieter. Evelyn did not celebrate or raise her voice, because the label itself had done enough for the moment. She simply asked Blythe whether the map on the screen was the same document she had relied on when claiming Crown Mesa had access across my ranch. Blythe said it was one of several historical documents. Careful answer. Then Grant stood and introduced himself, explained that he had reviewed the county development file, and asked Blythe a question I had already asked her twice. "What is the county recording number for?" "The easement across Calder Spur Ranch." Blythe looked toward one of the board members, then toward the association attorney seated along the wall. She said the legal history was complicated and that historic access could involve more than a single document. Grant nodded. "I understand. What is the recording number?" Silence. Evelyn opened her case and placed the 2004 offer letter on the document camera, followed by the survey proposal and the draft easement. She explained each one in plain language. The developer wanted access, the route was surveyed, and terms were drafted, but the draft did not contain an executed grant from the Calder family. Then she placed Grandpa Amos's letter on the screen. His signature was at the bottom. Mr. Calder declined the proposal because Red Spur was an active cattle movement route, Evelyn said. The file does not show that he later changed that decision. That landed hard. Grant followed with the county approval for Crown Mesa's northern emergency route, the access the developer eventually used to satisfy its subdivision requirements. One resident near the aisle raised his hand and asked the question everybody was starting to think. If we already have emergency access on the north side, why are we using his ranch? Blythe answered that Red Spur had become useful for events and provided traffic flexibility. Useful, not necessary. Then she tried to turn the room back toward the Longhorns, saying I had knowingly moved cattle through an active event and placed guests in an unreasonable situation. That was when Evelyn looked toward the county livestock officer seated 2 rows behind us. He had been quiet all evening. Now he stood with a folder in his hand, and the photograph Blythe thought would save her argument was about to become the next problem she had to explain. The county livestock officer walked to the front with the same calm expression he had worn all evening, then placed 3 records beside Blythe's photograph of the Longhorns. The first was an agricultural use map showing Red Spur as the ranch's established movement corridor. The second was our cattle log for that Saturday, and the third was the notice Crown Mesa had received before the wedding showcase. The time window was printed clearly, 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. No mystery there. He explained that the herd had been moving between the north pasture and south holding pens as part of normal ranch operations, and nothing in the record suggested I had created a new route or changed the schedule to interfere with Crown Mesa. Then Evelyn displayed photographs from the deputy's report showing the event vehicles stopped inside the ranch, the Crown Mesa sign attached to my cedar gate, and the replacement lock that had appeared after I refused commercial access. The deputy's notes also recorded Blythe claiming the association had a right to use Red Spur for the event. Her complaint had preserved her own position. That mattered. Evelyn went back to the property documents and placed my deed beside the proposed easement file, making the difference simple enough for everyone in the room to follow. My family's ownership record was there, the developer's request was there, Amos Calder's written refusal was there, and the county's later approval of Crown Mesa's northern emergency route was there. What was missing was just as important. No signed easement. No recording number. Blythe tried to say the association had relied on long-standing development plans, but Grant pointed toward the word proposed still glowing on the screen and explained that county planning documents could show what a developer intended without proving that a private owner actually granted the requested property right. He did not insult her. He did not need to. Then Evelyn opened the financial records. She displayed the Crown Mesa brochure advertising an exclusive private ranch arrival for $950, followed by booking sheets showing that customers had actually paid that fee. Another document projected close to $180,000 in added annual event revenue if the feature became a regular part of the clubhouse business. The residents stopped looking at me. They started looking at Blythe. One board member asked whether the association attorney had ever provided a recorded easement before the event program began, and Blythe answered that she had relied on the historical plat and prior development materials. The treasurer slowly opened the folder in front of him. "That is why I asked if we owned the road," he said. Evelyn already had the email. She placed it on the screen, showing the treasurer's question and Blythe's reply that the old plat provided access and that the board should not complicate this while the event program was gaining momentum. A second email discussed making Red Spur a regular part of event operations so that removing access later would appear disruptive to residents and vendors. Nobody said anything for several seconds. The timeline was building itself. Evelyn showed the security invoice next, dated shortly before I found the new lock on my gate, with hardware and access control work listed at the East Ranch entrance. Blythe Arden Wexler appeared on the authorization line that connected her directly to the physical change at the gate. No guessing. Blythe looked toward the association attorney, but he was reading the same papers everyone else was seeing and was careful not to make claims the records could not support. Evelyn summarized nothing dramatically. She simply placed the documents in order. The developer proposed an easement. Amos rejected it. The county approved another emergency route. I later refused Blythe's request. The lock was changed. Event traffic began. Crown Mesa charged customers for access. And the association continued after receiving written notice that Red Spur remained an active cattle corridor. Every step had a date. Every date had a record. Blythe finally returned to the Saturday incident and said the Longhorns had still created a dangerous conflict with guests. But the livestock officer pointed back to our advance notice and said the safer choice would have been to keep event traffic off the known cattle route during the scheduled movement window. The room went still again. The problem was no longer that cattle had entered an event road. The records showed event traffic had been sent onto a cattle road. That was the reversal. One of the board members asked for a short recess, and when they returned, the vice president made a motion to suspend Blythe's authority over event operations while the association's counsel, insurer, and board reviewed the matter. The motion passed. Blythe sat down without another presentation slide. Then the vice president turned toward me and asked what I wanted Crown Mesa to do about Red Spur. I looked around at residents who had never changed my lock, never sold my road, and in many cases had simply believed what their board president told them. "Use your entrance," I said. "I will use mine." The meeting did not end with cheers, and I was glad it did not, because real property disputes rarely wrap themselves up before everybody drives home. Crown Mesa's board hired outside counsel to review the records. Its insurer asked for copies of the event contracts and gate invoices, and Evelyn spent the next several weeks working through the damage, fees, and access issues one document at a time. Nobody waved a magic legal wand. The process worked. Crown Mesa stopped using Red Spur for commercial traffic almost immediately, and the black and gold event signs came down before the next weekend. The replacement lock disappeared from my Cedar Gate. Control of the entrance returned to Calder Spur Ranch, and vendors were told to use the subdivision's public entrance instead. Their approved northern emergency route remained available for its real purpose. Red Spur became a ranch road again. The financial part took longer, because people had paid Crown Mesa $950 for access they had been told was part of an event package. Under the settlement that followed, the association agreed to refund the affected access charges, repair the sections of gravel damaged by repeated commercial traffic, and cover the legal costs and property-related damages the parties finally agreed upon. Crown Mesa also removed Red Spur from its advertising and vendor instructions. The brochure vanished. Blythe never returned to her position as president, and after residents reviewed the emails, invoices, and event records, that did not surprise anybody. The part that bothered them most was not simply that she had been wrong about an old map, because people can misunderstand documents. It was that questions had been raised inside the board, including the treasurer asking whether Crown Mesa actually owned the road, and instead of stopping to verify the answer, Blythe kept moving forward with a commercial plan. Confidence had replaced checking. That was the real mistake. The new board changed its approval process, so property claims connected to future projects had to be verified before money was spent or contracts were offered. They also separated event planning from decisions involving neighboring land, which seemed like plain common sense after everything that happened. Most residents were relieved rather than angry. They wanted homes, not a property war. I never asked Crown Mesa to close its clubhouse or cancel weddings, because the venue itself was not my problem, and neither were the families who had booked events believing the association knew what it was selling. They had a legal public entrance, a working emergency route, and a beautiful place to hold their events. All I wanted was the same thing: my road. By October, the hill country heat had finally started to ease, and one late afternoon I stood at the East Cedar Gate, while 40 Longhorns gathered behind Copperjack for another move toward the South Pens. The sun sat low over the limestone ridge, throwing long shadows across the yellow grass, and the gravel on Red Spur had been repaired where the shuttle buses had pushed it toward the shoulders. There were no limousines waiting ahead. Good. I opened the gate, and Copperjack started down the road at that same slow pace he always used, with the rest of the herd following through a thin cloud of Texas dust. My ranch hands moved alongside them, and for the first time in months there was nothing unusual about the scene. That was exactly how I wanted it. Ordinary felt pretty good. I thought about Grandpa Amos and the letter he had written back in 2004, long before anyone imagined Red Spur being advertised as a luxury arrival experience. He had not needed fancy language to protect the ranch, because he understood something I almost forgot until this happened. When somebody asks for a right over your property, the answer matters. But the record of that answer may matter even more. He kept his paperwork. So did I. I also learned that staying calm does not mean letting people walk over you, and avoiding a roadside argument does not mean surrendering your rights. Sometimes staying calm means taking photographs instead of shouting, sending certified notices instead of making threats, keeping receipts instead of trusting memory, and finding the right professional when a disagreement becomes bigger than something neighbors can settle at a gate. That is not weakness. It is strategy. I know stories like mine get sharpened when they are retold, and this one is a dramatized narrative built around a simple lesson rather than legal advice for anybody's specific property dispute. Real easement and land laws can depend on the state, the deed, the recorded documents, and facts that may look small until somebody qualified reads them closely. But the part one hopes sticks with people is real enough. An official-looking map is not automatically ownership, a confident voice is not automatically authority, and anger is rarely better evidence than a dated piece of paper. If something you own matters to you, know where the records are, understand what you signed, keep proof of what happened, and use the lawful process before frustration makes decisions for you. Copperjack disappeared beyond the limestone ridge while the last few Longhorns followed him toward the South Pens, and I closed the cedar gate behind them. Blythe had used signs, brochures, meetings, lawyers, and a whole lot of polished words to make Red Spur sound like it belonged to Crown Mesa. Grandpa needed fewer words. The record said ours.